Entrepreneurs often think about marketing, sales, and growth, but what about the unseen side of your business? In this episode, we're uncovering what most entrepreneurs overlook when it comes to digital asset management.
Welcome to Biz Help for You, the show that saves you the expensive learning curve by providing advice from industry experts in every facet of the entrepreneurial journey. Too many small businesses collapse. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 20% fail within their first year, and less than 35% make it to their 10th anniversary. The goal of this podcast is to change that statistic. So if you're interested in learning more to be a successful entrepreneur, tune in today.
In today's discussion, you'll learn why protecting your online presence is critical, what risks may be hiding in your business, and how proper systems can safeguard your brand through every stage of growth. So, Paige, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you here too. I know this is an important topic and a lot of people don't even think about this. So I think it was great that it was, one of the things to present to the audience and help them understand really what they should be doing. But a lot of people may be confused on what that term even means. So can you start off by just explaining in simple terms what exactly is digital asset management and why should every entrepreneur care about it?
Yeah, digital asset management can mean a few different things, but most specifically, and what we're talking about is the actual ownership and what are all of the digital assets that go along with having your business online, whether it's domain and hosting, whether it's credit cards on file, whether it's vendors that have access to different accounts that you own, just how is all of that organized and where does that live and is it housed is what we're looking at when we look at digital asset management.
hmm And now that you've mentioned a few of those things, people are probably thinking like, oh, I was thinking you were talking about images or, intellectual property or something, but you're talking credit card numbers, you're talking about information vendors have, so that's something they probably didn't even think about at all. So like, is there some tip that you have in terms of how to effectively actually manage all of that so that it is safe? Because we do know there's a lot of cyber, activity going on where people are stealing data too. So do you have any tips, maybe even going that direction of what do they do to protect any sensitive data that they have?
Yeah, for protecting the sensitive data, it is one just documenting. But what does that look like, right? Or a lot of people, we get it when we talk to clients, they'll be like, it's somewhere. I definitely have the login detail someplace, but
Mhm.
it goes farther, than just login details. And to your point, I mean, some of that is intellectual property. Some of it is, do you have the brand logo files and the trademarks that you need to be running the company? Or is that something that's keeping you at more of an exposure down the road and, during the growth of your business? And so really paying attention and like who's in charge of those. We see a lot of businesses and entrepreneurs as they're growing start having VAs setting up accounts or having,
Mhm.
employees, and the next thing you know, their employees are leaving for whatever reason, just natural progression, or sometimes it's not. And but what do they have access to? And now what do we
Mhm.
do? And how quickly? I mean, it's frustrating when you get the phone call from a client that's like, "Hey, we just unfortunately had to let somebody go, but we don't know what they have access to." That's not
Mhm.
something that's a 5-minute little fix and, "Hey, don't worry, we've got you handled," unless you're keeping track of the digital assets appropriately. And so I don't think a lot of business owners think about it until it comes to that moment. And a lot of times
Mhm.
it's a panic and an, "Oh no, what do we do now" moment. And
Mhm.
very rarely is it a planned, we have a plan in place. This is what's going to happen. Here's how we're, a domain expired and now our emails are
Mhm.
down, so we can't get reset the password resets for anything. How do we work through that process? And this starts to get into technical lingo that businesses don't see every day, so it takes a lot
Mhm.
longer to recover it than having that plan.
Mhm. Well, even while you were talking about if someone is terminated or they leave, of their own accord or whatever that situation is, and all of the things that they had access to that now you need to make sure is removed, people may think like, oh, I've got it in my head. I know, I need to change this email address, login information or this, login information, but they might be forgetting a lot of different things as well. And I know for us personally for my own company, we actually have an offboarding template checklist that as soon as someone's leaving, we actually create a whole project to make sure we're going through and okay, we have to do this, and this, and then we don't have to remember, and I can have a team member help so we know who's where in the process. But that took a while for us to even think through, like, we should really create this. I had one originally in Excel in, a format, and now I have it in project management. So it makes it easier too. But I'm sure there's a lot of people who hadn't even thought about all of the things they need to do as well, so
No, I mean, because
mhm,
we're the same as you, and I'm glad you've got that piece in place because a lot of them, to your point, don't. But sometimes it's like, did we forget to remove them from the company phone line? And
mhm,
I forgot that they even had one set up to go to them. And while it's a quick thing to fix, can easily be overlooked. And again, depending on if it's their own accord, if it's not, how quickly do we need to make those things happen? And I think
mhm,
another place would be like plugins for the website, that they set it up, they purchased it, they handled these things, but they might not have used the company account. And so now
mhm.
it's, well, your credit card is actually linked to their personal
Right.
account for that plugin. How do we prove that to the plugin people and say, please stop running this card on file? Like, it's not authorized any longer. Well, that's
Mhm,
not the email address that it's attached to, so they might not listen to you. So there's those other pieces too that you can only control the parts that exist and were set up in the right
mhm.
manner, but not necessarily maybe what they set up through some of their own channels or not following us standards of practice there.
Mhm. Brings up a whole nother thing. Like someone might have hired an admin and say, "Hey, I need you to do this," but didn't specify you have to use this, login information or, this email address or something like that too. So do you have any best practices that you can recommend to someone who's listening right now who's thinking, first of all, maybe they were thinking, I never even had this in my mind before I need to do this. Or maybe there is someone who kind of has part of a process in place, but maybe not fully worked out. What do you recommend?
Get ahead of it early. Make sure that it's something that you do start putting into. As you continue to grow, it just gets harder and harder. As you've got more people coming in and sometimes leaving,
Mhm.
that gets harder. Know what you're signing with vendors. We see a lot of vendors actually own the website. We see a lot of vendors will terminate certain things that you signed up for when the contract ends, or if you terminate the contract. And so that can also be costly, that you thought that you had the website and the next thing you know, you say you no longer want to work with them, and they're like, great, well, we own it, have a great day. And it
Mhm.
seems absurd, it seems like a stretch as I say it. We just see it so often where we're just,
Mhm.
why your Google ad account, hey, we don't want to
Mhm.
run Google ads anymore. Most marketing companies say that that's their proprietary data that they set up on your behalf, and that they own the keywords, the data, the research, the ads, all of that. So you can't just cut the contract and keep that information for your records moving forward of, we just want to use a different company and try different campaigns. You get to keep no historical data. And so understanding what does that agreement look like and how do you better protect yourself and kind of negotiate those terms, or choose not to
Mhm.
work with those vendors and say, no, you're representing my company. This is our information. We should have access
Right.
to our Google Analytics. We should have access to Google My Business. So, those are another couple tips. One other tip I like is having 2 to 3 kind of backups. We've seen accounts get deleted for different reasons, more so on a user side. And so, like social media, for example, it
Mhm.
might be that one day Facebook decided to say that the admin account was flagged as spam, or, was hacked. And so they had to cancel that account. But there was no other user attached to it as an admin. So we
Mhm.
can't really get back into that social profile, and we can't add an admin back in because everyone else had manager roles. So how do
Mhm.
you really start to even safeguard those things to make sure that there's a couple different points of contact, the owner, you being included, but not just saying, hey, it's attached to the company somewhere, we're fine, because you just don't know. And so, having
Mhm.
more knowledge and control of it all. We do have a checklist that they can access that and download for free that kind of gets them going in that step, though, as you mentioned, where it's, hey, let's look at domain and hosting. How are the emails? Do you know where these things are? Great. Now let's get into marketing. Do you know where these things are? What that looks like? So it starts to help kind of identify, to your point, what are some gaps that maybe you've thought about this a tiny bit, but not to the
Mhm.
level to really start putting best practices into place.
Mhm. So I would love to maybe hear some misconceptions business owners have when it comes to managing and protecting these assets. I'm sure there's all kinds of things out there that like, oh, you only have to do this or you don't have to do this, but maybe that's false information. Do you have any of those that you have seen that people believe that aren't true?
Yeah, a couple of them. One of them would be that, hey, it's on auto renew. I have nothing to worry about. It's just going to keep working. That's how that works. We see that happen way too often. Credit card expires. They've just been
Mhm.
ignoring the emails that say that the auto renew is not turned on anymore or that there is an issue. That's one that we see way too often, and way too much is attached to that domain name for it to be to let go. And then also just making sure you do in fact have ownership. A lot of web people will set up a domain on behalf of, and
Mhm.
technically they're the ones who own that, not you. And so how do you at the end of the project say, and will you please make sure that we actually have, that we're the registered agent with that domain registrar, that we have login details, that all of the notifications go to our team, to really
Mhm.
make sure to protect yourself from a costly expense down the road of trying to legally battle who has ownership. We've had to see too many clients come to us trying to recover what technically should be rightfully theirs, but for whatever reason, the web company wanted to say, no, we own it. We bought it.
Mhm.
That's ours. And
Mhm.
so, just kind of starting to pay more attention as you're setting up accounts, or who's in charge of, and what do you have documented if a key employee does leave for whatever reason? Are they the only ones that know how your CRM is set up? Or do
Mhm.
you actually know how your CRM is set up and how it works and how things are integrated and what all is integrated? So not just completely relying on, hey, I know that someone in the company has that, because for whatever reason, right? There's a time that day is going to come. And so the more you can
Mhm.
document it. So I think those are some of the misconceptions, that they think like it all was completed under company time. So the company has ownership.
Mhm. Well, you were mentioning too the emails that get ignored, and they, have maybe potentially lost their domain because they didn't follow up on, this credit card expired or things. But I know there's a lot of fear around phishing too. Like there's all these people who are sending out things who said, this happened or that happened, your credit card has a problem or your website. So do you want to touch on how they can maybe make sure it's a valid email versus someone who's just sending something that could be harmful, so because I'm betting either someone is just overwhelmed with email so they don't see it, or they're thinking it's really not a valid email.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions just like, is this legitimate? Why are we getting this? I know Google Search Console will send stuff over of, you've got a page that's not indexed, and it's like, you didn't need that page indexed, but a business owner doesn't know even what that means, right? Or they're not
Mhm.
familiar with it, or to your point, great, I got this email, but I don't even really know how to log in and access the account to see if it's legitimate or not. But as far as some of the phishing, we do see it most in domain names. And with that, it really is just double checking in two different places. One would be who it's from, and make
Mhm.
sure that the URL, so the at domain.com, looks like a legitimate one. I know PayPal is one that those will kind of come from. As soon as you click from, you realize it's not at
Mhm.
paypal.com asking you for these things. So it's a pretty good clue right there that it's probably phishing. We don't really want to click much more. We've seen one recently with DocuSign,
Mhm.
where we've had clients of ours send us emails. It's a legitimate email, but it just says, hey, I wanted to send this over to you, this proposal over for you to review. That sounds completely legitimate to us. Like some, referral partners looking out, wanting us to take a look at this. Like, absolutely, let's click it. And as you start clicking, even in the URL, when it opens up the new tab, you're like, there's some words in there that are not words we're supposed to be saying in a typical like DocuSign thing, where it
Mhm.
does start to look a bit more malicious, or just kind of knowing. And if you're ever unsure, just even sending an email back to that person and saying, hey, I just got this from you. Is this something that you sent over? But
Mhm.
you're right, because phishing also happens where it's, hi, I'm updating my direct deposit. Can you, like send me an email with blah, blah, blah. I'm talking to
Mhm.
you in Slack right now. Like, why would you not have just sent that to me that way, right? And so even internally, especially as more and more teams are dispersed and working remotely, how do you even just protect from internal phishing by really
Mhm.
knowing what seems like typical behavior. Is this something that that employee would have typically sent through email, or something that would have been handled a different manner?
Mhm. And something you just said made me think too, this should be completely obvious, but in case not, if they get that email and they're questioning it, they need to send a brand new email to the person, right? Not replying back and saying, "Hey, are you really the one sending this to me?" Right?
That's a
You
very
know.
good point. You're correct, right? It's not just hitting reply, even especially if you're not sure if it is a malicious email or not, then replying or starting a whole new thread with a whole new thing saying, this is what I
Mhm,
got. And take a screenshot though, right? So you can screenshot it and attach it that way to be like, this is what I received. Did you get
mhm,
it? So that way you're not losing what you normally would have gotten if you had hit reply, and things
mhm.
carry over in that manner. So you're right. That is a really, really good way to help protect and just double check things before you get too far deep into having to recover.
Mhm. Exactly. Well, I do know too. I've heard from a lot of people too that say they just feel overwhelmed all the time by all the tech that we have to know. And like you're saying, there's websites, there's stuff you talked about being indexed that they're like, what does that mean? You know, there's so much when it comes to technology. And with running their business, they already wear like 20 hats, right? And so, how do they effectively really control all the things in their business to protect their online presence and their data and all the digital assets without being completely overwhelmed with all the technology that they would have to use?
I think mostly just understanding and asking questions. Why? Why do I have this? What is it doing? What purpose in my company is it serving? And because I think too often, yeah, there's a lot of vendors that are just setting up different pieces and you don't know why. And if you're not asking the right questions, then yeah, the emails come through and you don't know what to do with it. And that's something we
Mhm,
really like to do at True Ring Digital, and is always just ask us. Please just
mhm,
send us the email and go, what am I supposed to do with this? Is this something I
mhm,
should be paying attention to? Because we don't expect our clients to understand and know every little detail of it. They're like, to your point, they're busy running a business. But why did my contact form stop working? Let's
mhm,
at least start asking questions, right? Like, instead of, I don't know, leads just stopped working and we're not really seeing as much come in lately. Business is slow. Well, I don't know our marketing is
mhm,
not working. That's probably not it. Like, let's look at what's going on. But if you're not addressing these different concerns to the right people, then yeah, you are going to start to get even more overwhelmed or frustrated that something's not working. So, knowing who's responsible for what as you're making those agreements and bringing different people on, whether it's vendors, employees, virtual assistants, whatever that looks like, and really knowing, okay, but what did you set up? Why did we set that up?
mhm,
What purpose does SEO serve for my company? And like, how does that relate to Google Business Profile? And
mhm,
being able to start understanding, and when you see the pieces come together, it does start to make a bit more sense. Or try not to keep your logins in the email that they sent them to you in, but like, how do we put this in a secure space? Because then that way, when you do go Google that and say, why am I using, the CRM or this tool or payment processor, your login system will also say, yes, you do have an account here. This is how you log in.
mhm. Well, and obviously, we've been talking about, a lot of the entrepreneurs. They're just overwhelmed. They have so much to do, and and it's more talking about a sole proprietor or someone who's just running it on their own. But we haven't really talked about like the bigger companies per se. Where there's maybe a leadership team, and there's things like that going on too. So, do you have any tips for not just the solo person, but if you're running a team, how do you manage all of this as well effectively to make sure everything is being done and you're protected?
Yeah, I think that's where we do start to see it come in even more, right? As soon as we start to expand outside of entrepreneur, who's probably set most of these things up on their own, or,
Hmm.
hired out if they've needed to. But with the businesses that are larger, multiple people on the team, that's another area that we've really, really seen the employees are the ones setting these things up. And again, how do you come in as an owner and go, no, what is this? Like, why did we set this up? What we've also seen is accounts receivable at one
Hmm.
point got approval for such and such to keep running. 10 years later, it's still running and they haven't used it for 5 because no one told them that it needed to stop, right? And
Right.
so a lot of times as the companies get bigger, we actually see it really start to add up in cost as
Hmm.
far as how long has that been running that we have not been using that third party tool? We switched this email marketing to that email marketing a couple years ago, but it's the last thing to be communicated to accounts receivable sometimes, or
Mhm.
payable. So, being able to keep a pulse on and making sure ownership is at the right level. And again, having multiple people as owners, so that, I mean, we've seen it where we've had employees of a company come in and say, I've got hosting handled. I do this in my spare time. I'll just take the hosting over for the company. And we're like, oh, okay, like that's what's been authorized. That's what's been approved. That's how they want to handle it. And so we let them take the hosting, and then I get the call 6 months later, they just deleted the whole website because they got fired. And how do we rebuild an entire website? And all of the backups were on their server as well.
Mhm.
Just start, like making smarter moves and decisions. That's fine if they wanted to host it. But as a company, how do we know where the backups are being stored when that happens in the future, so that we're not losing everything overnight
Mhm.
because of, again, those are hard scrambles that they weren't thinking that that was going to happen. I
Mhm.
don't even know if they fully knew that it had come off of our server. We were the first
Mhm.
call, they made, is why is our website down? And we had to
Mhm.
say, well, this is what we got authorization for. This is what your team, and you told us that's the point of contact. So knowing who is making these different decisions, do they have the authority to make those decisions? And then back to, standards of practice and best policies within the company as well.
Mhm. While you're talking about that too and saying like, "Oh, we've had this for all these years and we haven't even used it." That's, one reason why what I do too, we do bookkeeping and payroll and teach operational efficiency and things like that too. But I'll say like audit your expenses, like review and see what you're actually doing, and don't just look at a basic P&L and not the detail, right? Because you can actually find like, oh, we've been paying this for all this time and we're not using it. So I definitely agree with you that a lot of times people just have something, it's on just the auto pay, and until a credit card expires, they don't even think about it until they have to add a new credit card or something too. So I definitely agree with you on that too, where it can go on and people just don't realize, that they've been spending on something they're not even using. So definitely want to encourage, take a look, at what you're actually spending on. So I would love to have you maybe even talk about how having this system in place is going to help a business going through a transition too. So, maybe it's someone who is going to retire and they want to sell their business to someone else. Maybe there's a company is merging with another company. How do they manage all of that as a company going into transition?
It starts to get complicated because a lot of clients aren't paying attention to it, right? And then all of a sudden they start having the conversations around transition, or it's a sudden, succession planning wasn't fully in place. And how do how do we be more prepared for some of the unexpected as well? And what we recommend is start that process early and start putting everything in place. We can see by having digital asset management in place, it can actually start to impact your valuation, or not having it in place can equally negatively impact
Mm-hmm.
evaluation. So if you are getting ready to prepare for an exit of some sort, putting all of that together, what we've seen is it's talked about by all sorts of different teams. The network IT team is usually looking at it, legal is looking at it, somewhere there's some finance looking at it, but no one's actually looking at the ownership and what
Mm-hmm.
happens. And we've seen deals stall, we've seen deals die, where it's just like, you thought you owned this, your website, but turns out if we don't keep that vendor on board, we lose the whole thing. Is this still a good deal for us? Right? Like, or
Mm-hmm.
no, we're going to reduce the valuation because it's not worth that. Or even we see that you've got 2.6 stars on Google. I want to change the valuation. Like, we're going to have to rebuild and overcome this negative impact that your online reputation has had for us to want to, acquire you. So how can you start looking at that digital footprint and the ownership of all of these things and really get them under control through some digital asset management going into, same thing, if something were to happen tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
would a employee, or just even your spouse, or even a family member, know how to get in and keep most of that business running? What does that goal and plan look like? Or do you have all of the logins written down in some random place that they'll never know how to decode, and we're never going to be able to recover the business, right? So how do we be prepared for any situation as a business owner, especially entrepreneurs and solopreneurs? Like, we see that with If something happened tomorrow, how do the clients get what they need? If something happens tomorrow, can orders still get out the door? Are you putting a family member in the rears trying to figure out how to offset the income they just collected up until everything can get sorted out? So really understanding what that looks like, I think, is a critical piece of digital asset management. And then
Mhm.
as the post-transaction side, how do we hand that all off? We've got a client right now who just acquired, and we're like trying to go back and forth because they're like, well, the domain's with GoDaddy or with Google. It's not with Google. That's not how that works. Like, they don't own domains anymore. And so
Mhm.
we're trying to navigate with them and explain, like, you're hung up on something that we're never going to find. Like, we have to go someplace else. But if we don't know where the domain's actually at, how long is this going to take? And it's been about 3 weeks now that that client has
Mhm.
acquired and not been able to move forward with sales because they don't want to do anything until they're able to gain ownership of the domain, the emails, and the hosting. And
Mhm.
so, just like that, you just acquired something. You're 3 weeks alone without any business or being able to move forward with, even transitioning it into what you currently, previously had because you're merging or rolling up. So asking the right questions in that transaction process is also extremely critical to know what is it that you're actually acquiring and what
Mhm.
is it that is not a part of. I think we had another client call and they thought they had a website because if you Google the company, a website comes up. Turns out it's most likely someone else that put that up on behalf of, and we have no idea who put it up. So
Mm.
how do we compete on SEO when there's a website that's already ranking and it's not legitimate though? How do we update menu prices if it's not a legitimate website that we don't control and we don't know who's in control of it, right? So
Mhm.
now it's a legal fee to go after and say, hey, we need a cease and desist. You need to take this down. Do we even know who to send that to? So
Mhm.
doing due diligence ahead of time on either side is extremely important.
Mhm. Yeah, and while you were talking about that too, it made me think, the other day we went to a restaurant and we searched the hours, on Google Maps and it said they close at 7. And when we got there on the door, it said they closed at 8. And when we told them like, oh, it's wrong. And they're like, oh, we can't get into the Google. It says like, we don't own it or, whatever. Where then my husband's like, well, I can go in as a user and just say, hey, the hours are actually this. So like he did it that way. But that also could be surprising to some people thinking like there is something out there that says you exist at this location, but then you have no control over it as well. So is there something that someone can do then in that case and say, look, I'm actually the legitimate owner of this business at this location and someone else kind of has claimed something in my name? Like, is there something you can do to kind of rectify that?
It depends on what piece of it is. So, for example, on Google My Business, absolutely, we can work through processes to claim ownership, get that back into. And again, that's if every party is willing to cooperate and work through it. There's always going to be reasons that maybe we don't. And again, do we need to get legal in to start proving these things? And typically that comes down to where's the trademark, not necessarily
Mhm.
is it, registered with the Secretary of State. No, most small businesses don't have the trademark to these things, right?
Mhm.
So now
Mhm.
it's an even lengthier battle that you have to fight. Social media profiles, it's going to be a lot harder. There's a really, really
Mhm.
hard chance to recover anything that's related to the social profiles. They just are a bit more non-existent when it comes to support. So
Mhm.
again, really keeping track of that from the beginning and even like the business ad side of the social profiles and making sure you do know who set that up as well. That was another one that a company is going through where they knew that one of the primary marketing sources was for Facebook ads. But
Mhm.
when they acquired and they started asking for the logins to things, it turns out that no one actually knows where the Facebook like ad logins are. So they
Mhm.
can't pick up and continue running ad campaigns until they can hunt down who was running those and where and how and how do we update credit cards and ownership. So again, while that's the primary lead generation source, it's now tanking a business because we can't put that back up in place right away. So, there's different levels of, for the most part, yes, we can recover just about everything. Social media is where it starts to get the hardest, though.
Mhm. Well, this has been an interesting discussion. So much to know, and I'm sure there's so much more to learn, but I know we are coming to the end of the time that we have together today. So I wanted to ask, do you have an offer that you would like to extend to our listeners? And if they want more information from you, how can they contact you?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we have a free digital asset assessment checklist that you can check out at trueringdigital.com/bizhelp for you. I know we'll probably get that in the show notes too. But like I said, it's a really, really good spot to just start going through the checklist and see where some gaps are at. If you get into some things or just this show in general kind of sparks some questions, visiting us on our website at trueringdigital.com, you can definitely find out a lot more about it. And then I do quite a bit of just posting and information on LinkedIn at LinkedIn, and you can find me on at Paige Wiese there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on my show, Paige. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed our discussion.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's such a good topic.
And I want to thank you, the listener, as well. And if you enjoyed today's topic and you want to hear additional information, you can find access to exclusive content in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in today. Would you please share this episode with those you know and leave a review on your favorite platform? And if you find our show informative, would you consider being a financial sponsor to help me continue my mission to educate business owners? A link is located in the episode description, and no amount is too small. I'd really appreciate your support. If you are interested in connecting with our guest and receiving the offer they had to share, a link to our resource page is in the show notes. Finally, if you have any bookkeeping or payroll needs, reach out to us at 310-534-5577 or contact@abandp.com. My team and I are eager to assist you. Until next time, have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Biz Help for You. Please join your host, Candy Messer, again next time. Have a terrific day.